Hello everyone, Vincent Teo from HDTV Test here. I'm a TV reviewer and professional calibrator. This is just a quick video to demonstrate and explain why the HDR video output from Red Dead Redemption 2, at least on the Xbox One X version, is broken, and why really you should disable HDR to obtain the best picture quality during gameplay. But before I jump right into the explanation, I would like to thank a couple of people. First is this user called evilboris, who does some really in-depth analysis of HDR games from the Xbox One X and also PlayStation 4 Pro consoles. And he has written a couple of fantastic articles on the hdr forums. And I believe that he will be publishing an article on Digital Foundry analyzing the HDR output of this game, Red Dead Redemption 2. So I will put a link in the YouTube description below. And the other person that I would like to thank is my close colleague, David Mackenzie, who has been kind enough to provide some scope analysis in terms of the RGB per rate of the HDR video output from this game that is captured on the Xbox One X. So let me explain the setup here. This is the 65-inch LG E8, which I've reviewed recently. It has been calibrated for both SDR and HDR. And I'm piping this game, Red Dead Redemption 2, from an Xbox One X. And currently it is rendering in what is supposed to be HDR. So the core problem with the HDR video output of this game, Red Dead Redemption 2, is that it is actually not a true HDR output at all. It is basically a very rudimentary form of SDR to HDR conversion. I wouldn't even go so far as to call it a conversion. The game engine is actually using an SDR base without any extra specular highlight detail, without any extra tone mapping involved. So let me explain what that means. When we actually go into the HDR calibration screen, so if we go into HDR calibration by clicking on display here, you can click on HDR calibration. So this is the in-game calibration for the HDR video output, and the default setting, I believe, is actually 100, and you can actually increase it to 300 if it is an OLED, which is the case here. And then, if you so wish, you can actually increase it all the way up to 500. So at 100, what it actually does is that it caps the peak white or peak luminance at 100 nits, which is far too low for a HDR game. Usually we want at least 1000 nits or even 4000 nits of peak brightness to give you that impact, to give you enough dynamic range for the shadow detail and also the specular highlight detail to be both presented at the same time, to give you that wow, that HDR impact. But the default setting of 100, this is already a clue to let us know that the in-game rendering is actually derived from an SDR source rather than true HDR. So if you set it to 100, what we can see is that it is fairly dim. The shadow detail across there is not very visible, and also it doesn't have that HDR wow that you would expect from a HDR game. Okay, so let's increase it to about 300. So yes, it becomes brighter, but the actual dynamic range is actually not increased because the black level and also the midtones also go up correspondingly as well. And if you brighten it all the way up to 500, obviously the brightest parts of the picture will be aligned to 500 nits of peak white, but the black level also goes up correspondingly, and you don't really get that much of an increase in dynamic range. It's basically moving the dynamic range, correspondingly together with the peak white. And my colleague David Mackenzie has kindly provided me with an RGB per rate scope analysis of the screen grabs that I've taken from the Xbox One X in 4K HDR in the JXR format, and I will show them to you here. So at 100 nits, you can see that the peak white is limited to 100 nits, roughly 100 nits with maybe some overshoot, and the black is quite close to 0 nits. But if you increase the in-game brightness to 300, then the peak white will be elevated to 300 nits, and you get a very slight increase in dynamic range. But what happens is that the black level is also elevated, the gamma is also brightened, and therefore you don't really get more of a HDR impact. You get a really washed out look with an elevated black level. And if you increase it to 500 nits, you can see that the black level also goes up correspondingly with the midtones as well. So you get a brighter picture, but also a more washed out picture. Now, if we compare the dynamic range that we've captured from Red Dead Redemption 2 with another Xbox One X game, Assassin's Creed Origins, you can see that the dynamic range of Assassin's Creed Origins is actually so much wider, ranging from 0 to 1000 nits, whereas the one on Red Dead Redemption 2 is really fairly compressed. And the reason is because it is actually not true HDR, it is actually derived from an SDR source. So let's say in the game itself, when you look at snow, right, you don't actually get more increase in specular highlight detail. You don't really get the reflection of the sun off the snow. You don't really get the feeling that, you know, there are more, say, footprints that are visible in the snow. You just get this really fairly blanket white piece of snow. And when you look at other, what would I say, objects that really should give you that sort of wow in HDR, let's say look at this fire, it is not really different from SDR. There's no real flame in flame, if you get what I mean. There's no real increase in specular highlight detail. And that is the core problem of the game. Basically, it does not output in true HDR, even though it is sending out a HDR signal and kicking the TV into HDR mode. It is not actually sending a true HDR image. It is an SDR core that has been, you know, expanded according to this number here without a real increase in dynamic range or HDR impact. And therefore, if you actually switch off HDR, you can actually get a better picture, because when you switch off HDR, the black level is clamped correctly. You regain all the control on your television to actually set the backlight or the OLED light correctly, the contrast correctly, so that you get the best dynamic range from the image, rather than being fixed to a HDR output where backlight or OLED light is usually running at maximum, contrast running at maximum, and you get no wiggle room to optimize the image. And also with the elevated black level, if you actually increase this figure by too much, it means that you can actually get a much better picture with native SDR output from the game. And you get deeper blacks, you get a richer picture, you get a better contrast by using a native SDR output from the game. And I believe on the Xbox One X, you can't turn HDR off from the game itself. So you have to go into the Xbox One menu, go to settings, and then go to display sound, go to video output, go to video modes, and then turn off HDR10 before the game will actually run in SDR. And obviously the HDR calibration screen is not effective now, so we'll just get out of it. But if we just get back to the game itself, hopefully you can see that there is an increase in pop and vibrance of the image in terms of how the shadows fall, and also most importantly the inky blacks that are maintained in native SDR output. And even if you actually switch on HDR, you're not going to get an increase in terms of the specular highlight detail. It's basically just the same, but you know, with a screwed up output. And I believe on the PS4 Pro you can switch off HDR in game as well. So I don't know whether Rockstar can actually fix the HDR output on this game, but this is just a quick video to let you know that you may be better off disabling HDR for playing this game and just play it with the native 4K output, at least on the Xbox One X, in SDR to get the most immersive gameplay, the best color and contrast rendition. If you found this video useful, please click the like button and subscribe to the HDTV Test YouTube channel for more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.